basically went into our environment and took what our environment had to give us. We had to search for it. We had to do work. There's no doubt about that. We don't ever want to lose this picture. Oops. This picture, that energy was involved in this process, but the energy was a searching and hunting energy. And we used that food energy we got to slowly increase our population over time. And then somehow we hit agriculture. And I would love to see this speeded up as a history, but somehow we learned that we could modify our environment. That took energy, and as a result of that energy, we got more food out of our environment. And then we formed a symbiotic relationship with draft animals, and that took our energy, both our food energy that we got out of the environment and our energy, but that let us put even more energy into modifying our environment. And then that, of course, let us do that. And then finally, we hit the mother lode, if you will, and that took some energy. But boy, did we get a lot more energy out for what we put into that. And even though from a true human evolution historical perspective, this is a blip, it's a big blip. And here's why, because there's a pretty direct connection to energy in, population out. And as I said earlier, we have enough energy now in our economy, in our food system, where we are energetically wasteful. And this is very present in our diet. So for example, meat consumption rates continue to increase even though meat operates at a very strong energy loss. And then similarly, this is probably the bigger development in our diets, this whole food processing industry, including restaurants. You know, how many meals people eat out now? It's more than 1 in 3. The percentage of food that goes through this is right around 75%. That takes that energy, and now it diverts a lot of our food from coming directly to us. And then finally, that might not be around for so much longer. So here's some reasons to change. Climate change, peak oil. You know, when people look back 1,000 years from now and they say, what made that such an interesting time? It's these things hitting simultaneously. You know, energy becoming a big issue in climate change, and they're in competition, significant competition, because we have some solutions to alleviate this, at least in the short term, and they involve driving this off the charts. So the Keystone Pipeline being one example. Canada has a heck of a lot of oil, and it's really dirty. So here's some more incentives to change, and this is kind of focused on my personal bias of why, boy, fossil fuels just make me want to itch and scratch. They're dirty. Somewhere behind every gallon of gas is something ugly. And then finally, if you reduce your energy into your food system, your farm system, you increase your resiliency. Because we have sources of energy that are under our control, but they're significantly less than the sources of energy that are outside our control. So this is what the food system's been doing the last few years. So over a 10-year period, our total U.S. energy has gone up some. Our food-related energy's gone up a lot. And if you look at a per capita basis, so per person, we actually are doing a little better being more energy efficient, but quite a bit worse in our food system. So that overall, we are putting a little over 7 calories into our food system for each calorie that comes out. This shows a couple different menus that were put together by a research team in Sweden. So these numbers are probably a little worse for us energy-wise. But here's the real take-home message. This is the energy in to a particular item on the menu. This is the energy out. If you scan that list, you don't tend to see any winners. Baked goods tend to be one of the few things where you get more energy out than the total food system that goes in. And, you know, one of my own personal sobering ones was research on a can of corn. 3/4 of the energy that's in the corn is what it takes you to drive to the grocery store, get the corn, and come back home, assuming you're taking other things with you and so on. Yes?
So are these for conventional going to the store as opposed to the chicken potatoes and carrots all being raised on the land where they're consumed?
Yes, ma'am. These are national averages. So these folks did a really good job of finding out what the average chicken produced in Sweden looked like, including the average energy it took to cook it, and so on. And so this includes everything from raising the animal, and includes all the energy that went in forms of fertilizer, feed, and so on. Energy covers all these things that come up on this slide. So oil is energy. What these folks are burning and doing their work is energy. And there's energy in this produce. But it's obviously very different. And in general, there's going to be some simplifying here. We want to pull out main themes, but not get too caught up in specifics. And to realize that, it is possible that when we grow some of this stuff, it takes us more energy to grow it than we're going to get out, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We pointed out that there's sound arguments to say from an ecological perspective, we can't continue to put more energy into a system than we're getting out of it. The more power you bring to bear, the more energy inefficient you tend to be. Okay, so here's 4 different technologies, all largely doing the same thing. Now, I'll be the first to say this, and by the way, this isn't necessarily with that study, but it was done in a developing context, and this might be what it looks like, is very different from what this tool is going to do, is very different from what that tool is doing. So I'm not saying these are all necessarily the same thing either, but basically if you want to work up a hectare of land, the bigger the piece of equipment you bring to bear, whether that's your body, draft animals, or different sized tractors, the more energy it's going to take you. So why do we do this? Well, a hectare is 2.5 acres, 200,000 kilocalories. A kilocalorie is a food calorie. So 200,000 food calories of human energy to work up 2.5 acres. Okay. Well, when I'm working hard, I'm eating about 3,000, and I'm probably burning 1,500, maybe 2,000 calories a day. That's like 100 days of labor to do that work. Okay. Well, that's where that oil starts to look pretty good. Here's another way to look at it. My friend Nate Hagens, who's an energy analyst, likes to talk about your energy slaves. If you live in America, behind us on a per capita basis, enough energy is getting burned to be the equivalent of 147 people working for you around the clock, 24/7. Okay, that's what's subsidizing our current lifestyle. Again, not necessarily any particular individuals in this room, but on the average. So here's another way of thinking about it. I did these calculations because we developed an oxen-powered electricity cart. Basically turns a big wheel that drives a couple alternators, has a bank of batteries. Our oxen pull it around, and then they drive juice into the batteries. So a kilowatt hour is a measure of energy or work, and it's basically the energy that lets you take 1 kilogram and lift it 350 kilometers straight up, or you can think about it as lifting 350 metric tons 1 meter up. Either way, it's a significant amount of work that comes out of that 1 kilowatt hour. Our oxen can pull, somewhere around 200 kilograms comfortably. That's the amount of weight they pull behind them, meaning they have to travel 2 kilometers to generate 1 kilowatt hour. Now, we did the numbers and we said, wow, if we can get these guys out working and the system works for about 3 hours a week, in the winter, that's all the energy to light our barns for winter chores. But there's a bigger question of, do we need to go cold turkey? Okay. Well, we need a diversity of solutions, and Greg Cox, who's a farmer down in Rutland, has a follow-up to this, which is, we all suck. This is what he says when he goes out and looks out at his black plastic mulch over his beds. All right, so let's get into farming and what farming looks like and where these different energy slaves are kicking in for us. So we got power needs, tillage, cultivation, seeding, there's others. Nutrient needs, getting nitrogen into our soil, mining other nutrients and transporting them to our soil. Pest control, irrigation, that's quite a list. It adds up to, on average, somewhere around 400 gallons per person a year to fuel just our farm system. Now note this includes transportation, so this is out of the farm gate to wherever the first step is beyond that. and you can see relatively what's expensive. And so in particular, I tend to think oxen, human power. You know, this is why I'm looking at what are ways we can power our systems on the farm. But notice, you know, over 50% more energy going into our nutrients. And that's a pretty important thing to keep in mind. So how are we going to get rid of all this stuff and get rid of the fossil fuels? Well, it's going to take systems, and it's going to take investment. And this is how I like to think of what those investments look like. First and foremost, as it says over there, ecology. It's more important than you. Okay? As a farmer, this is more important than what I do, is investing in our ecosystems, getting our soils to work for us, getting our surrounding habitat, whether it's pollinators or natural pest control, to work for us, and investing in those things that don't run on fossil fuels. Got to be smart. Got to invest in my own knowledge and understanding, invest in those I'm working with. You know, we have to read and think and come to NOFA conferences. Okay? It's going to involve things that are built, and probably built with some fossil fuels, like remay possibly, or high tunnels, or really good, well-designed, human-powered tools. And then finally, it's going to involve talking to each other and communicating. Joe said in his keynote up there, yeah, it's just about communication. Again, NOFA conferences, but forming the links so that we're more efficient as a group. Might look a bit like this. So instead of at our college, the Cisco truck backing up to the dining hall, which it still does and will for quite a while to come, more of this, our farm stand in the lobby, our farmers market, which you can walk out of our administration building, and one block down is our farmers market in town. Our CSA we run at the college. Okay. Again, I'm being a little simplistic. Replacing power. We're going to talk more about this, but there are a lot of options out there. Horses, oxen, human power, electric tractors. Really, it's the only thing that makes me kind of in our research and talk about a little bit of this, but you know, draft animals have issues. I'm a big fan of trying to move in that direction. But we got to remember that at the turn of the century, a quarter of our land was just for feeding our horses. It's a little bit easier training somebody to drive a tractor straight than it is to drive a team of horses or a team of oxen straight. Okay? And then there's just certain little challenges, like I want to turn that compost. If I could figure out a way to put a bucket loader onto an ox yoke and get them to do that, we'd be somewhere. And then small grain production. This is a big area. I love vegetables, but at the end of the day, vegetables are mostly water. We want to feed people. Grains are pretty important. And I'm pretty schooled in draft animal technologies and development. And I was pretty sure there was no such thing as a draft animal-powered combine. And fortunately, somebody disillusioned me of that. Okay, there is. Okay, here's some great pictures of this thing working. You see the sacks of grain coming off the side. Okay, look how many people are riding that thing. And look how many horses are pulling that thing. Okay. Now, it's important to remember that right around the time we were starting to really get into things like research and development was right around the time we had these new engines coming on, and we kind of dropped draft animal equipment. So it's a good question to say, well, what would happen if we spent a few $1 million in developing a draft animal-powered combine? Certainly we could do something better than that, I'm sure. So, and just one example to throw out there, we are very fortunate to have a subculture in the United States that's keeping these technologies and knowledge alive and developing them and doing some of that research and development. They don't have $1 million budgets, but they're putting money and energy into it. But this goes back a ways. This is data from the 70s. But still, looking at Amish dairies, okay, reducing their fossil fuel inputs and their energy inputs. In one case, increasing the land and labor significantly. But in the other case, actually using less land, despite feeding their horses, to make this work. Kind of gets at that danger of oversimplifying. On the human power side of things, this is a study down at Kentucky State, run by Mike Bomford. They have 3 systems. One is a biointensive system, which for those of you who are not familiar with that, involves a lot of digging, double digging your beds and so on. They have a market garden, which they run with a walking tractor, a rototiller, and then a small farm with I think it's a 25 horsepower riding tractor. And this just shows some of their data coming out. Okay. So this is the amount of labor going in. This is in minutes per square meter, but you can just think about it in relative terms. Okay, not even comparable labor-wise. Okay. And then this is the energy going in. Now the nice thing is this red, this is human energy. Okay, so you could argue that, yes, it's energy, they're getting charged for that, but depending on your context and what you're trying to do, there's a big difference between this, which is basically gasoline, petroleum, and this, which is food getting turned into activity. No matter how you scratch it, okay, this looks an awful lot like work. And this kind of motivates some of our thinking. John Jevons' book, How to Grow More Vegetables, is one of my early vegetable growing Bibles, but so is Elliot Coleman. And what we've been working on developing in our system is how to do minimal tillage. Other issues, so fossil insecticides and herbicides. I won't go into this in a lot of detail. Lots of folks telling you ways to reduce your energy inputs into this without using fossil fuels. It's those investments in natural capital, smarter technology. Similarly, weed control, they just left this morning, but I understand the Nordells were here yesterday. They give one of the best talks on weed control I know, and it's only partway into their talk, you're like, oh, wait, wow, they're doing all this with horses. Okay, the horses are kind of a bit of a sideline for their weed control. It's natural systems and human smarts. And it's worth noting that, first, some things like biodegradable mulches or black plastic mulch, yes, they take fossil fuels to produce, but if you're cultivating with a diesel-powered tractor, you might very well be saving energy by using those. And then similarly, organic amendments can be very energy intensive. So it's not a, you buy your 7 Dust, you say, oh, fossil fuel product, but there's a lot of energy that goes into any of the development and production of those products. Irrigation. Obviously, this varies a lot with who you are. Vegetable farmers tend to invest in irrigation. You'd like to know that your seeds are going to germinate when you plant them. That's a lot of energy that goes into that. Okay. On the other hand, there's energy that goes into planting a crop and not having it germinate, or having poor yields because you didn't irrigate. Okay. But we do know we again have investments we can make. Soil organic matter, organic mulches. One of my favorites, we use the biointensive planting method where we put stuff pretty close together, and when stuff reaches near full size, we have pretty good canopy cover. And what that means is less moisture loss. We only water when we seed, and that's it. We actually are not well equipped for irrigation, and as somebody said, when you don't have something, you innovate. All right, the 33%er. You've heard of the 99%. Well, the 33% is almost as bad. This is a tough one, folks, and we're going to look at some of our data related to this. Nutrients are expensive. Okay, so you think about nitrogen, here's what I think of when I think of nitrogen getting broken apart and fixed. I think of lightning, which can do it. Hello, God? No, sorry. Think of lightning, which can do it. Huge amount of energy coming down. I think of the Oklahoma City bombing. Big truck of urea. Okay, this is the kind of energy we're talking about. There are other ways to do this, but there's no free lunch. I think that's over there somewhere, right? So getting these nutrients is a challenge. And at the same time, pretty important. I think it's a fair question. If we suddenly had to go to all organic forms of nitrogen in our production, would we be able to feed everybody? Even, transitioning to a vegetarian diet. So this leads, all this leads to our research, and this is kind of the underlying framework for what we're doing, which is that to ask the question, can you grow vegetables or anything without fossil fuels, is not a meaningful question, because we did it for a really long time, right? 9,800 and some years, okay? The bigger question is, what's the impact? What are the trade-offs? So I tend to think a lot about things getting traded for each other. So just as an example, fertilizer and ag chemicals, one of the big things they do is more energy, lets us get by with less land. Okay, we put synthetic fertilizers in, yields go up, energy inputs go up, but the amount of land to grow the same amount of food goes down. You come the other way, you take land to grow biofuels, grow cover crops, to feed draft animals. Okay, now you got to use more land to save energy. Ideally. That should be noted that a little bit of fertilizer actually system-wide can save you some energy. Because if I get more yield, I'm doing the same amount of tractor work, cultivating, plowing, and so on. So, our initial research is that, somewhere around up to about 80 pounds of nitrogen, you're actually saving energy by getting more yield. Now there might be issues of, well, what if you had to clean up the pollution? Okay, like I said, it gets complicated pretty easy. On our side, one of the things I like are, what does bringing more labor to play let you do? Basically getting more minds and more feet and hands close to the ground where you're growing. Intensive plantings, for example. You can get a lot more plant matter in the same amount of space if a human's doing it. And just as an example, when we do in our human beds and we rip up a cover crop, we could take all that cover crop biomass and put it somewhere to compost and then bring it back. And that would be fine, but that's a lot of work and energy. And when that cover crop's leaching nutrients, where are they going? Quite possibly somewhere I'm not going to plant. Or instead, we just make little compost piles on the beds. I couldn't do this with draft animals. I can't be going down cultivating and be like, okay, lift the cultivator, go over the little compost pile and keep going. Human flexibility lets me do that. Okay, so that change creates opportunities that are not there with other growing systems. We call our research LEAFs, Long-Term Ecological Assessment of Farming Systems. And this map's not quite accurate, but you get the picture. We've got 4 plots of human power, each of them a 1/16 of an acre, so it's a 1/4 acre total. 4 plots of the tractor, same size. We call it tractor. It's an 11 horsepower BCS walking tractor. We only have 1 oxen because oxen on a 1/16 of an acre, forget it. Really a 1/2 an acre is about the minimum size they can work efficiently. And we want these systems to be efficient. And all of them are doing the basic same task, which is we got approximately 19 different vegetable crops we want to grow, kind of a mix representative of a CSA production. And we want them to be grown in relatively the same quantity. So don't get too caught up in these numbers. But what that means is over time, if one system puts 10% of its space into potatoes, the other system should be close to that. So we're not a research institute. Our system has to produce veggies that are going to end up being valued by people. So we had to balance that. There are 3 systems we're looking at, and one is our human-powered system. I already mentioned minimal tillage. So these are 20 permanent 5-foot by 100-foot beds. Basically, the growing area is 3.5 feet wide, and we stay off it. And one of the main ways I offend people is like, oh, could you not step there? Okay, that's kind of sacred ground where we grow. Because it gets back to this soil health connection. We need that soil health, and in particular because we have minimal outside inputs. Notice what's not on here, compost or any other nutrient additions. Arguably, you could say, well, it depends on how much potting soil they're putting in. And we've actually run the numbers on our leaf mulch. Our leaf mulch add up to some nutrients coming in, but in a very carbon-intensive form. So to make up for that, not only do we treat the soil really well, 1/5 of the beds are in cover crop each year. And there goes some of that yield, right? That still gets counted as growing space. Minimal tillage, and then my favorite part, we use really cool tools. Draft animal power. We have a system modified after what Ann and Eric Nordell have pioneered. We don't have the land, so ours is a 3-year instead of a 4-year rotation. But that means 1 year out of every 3, we're in an intensive fallow. Our oxen do primary and secondary tillage, cultivation, manure spreading. They dig potatoes for us. Occasionally, if we've had rained-on hay, they'll go out and bring in rained-on hay. Equally important, they power our nutrients. So we have we make an estimate of what's a sustainable amount of manure we can take out of what they're producing, and apply to the vegetables, the rest going back to where they get their forage, so the pasture and hayfield. Okay? We soil test, and we'll adjust that as we need to, but that's where a lot of our nutrients are coming from. And then some inputs are allowed, so we will put remay on there. The human area, no outside products, so no remay, no bioinsecticides. The closest we'd come is we might, dry and crush some of our own red peppers and spray on there. System's kind of in between, and then this one we kind of call conventional organic, where we are trying to model what I would call best organic production practices. So conventional here means more typical, normal organic, nothing pejorative meant by that. We use 11 horsepower BCS walking tractor, but we have a hiller furrower with it that we use to furrow for our potatoes. We use it to dig. We have a potato digger that we use to dig our potatoes. We hill around certain crops for weed control. We have a cultivator bar. It's just got a basic set of shovels, but we use it for cultivation. We use it to cut down cover crops. So we're really trying to model this after what you might see in some places in Europe where a BCS is used more intensively, not just a rototiller. And then again, when we go through Johnny's and Johnny says, boy, here's a great pest control amendment, we consider it. It's not ruled out. If it makes sense economically within the confines of being an organic system, we use it. We do buy in ProGrow as an organic nutrient amendment. Okay. All three systems we want to run as well as we can. All three of these systems, we're tracking all the labor, all the energy inputs, at least as many as we can get a handle on, and the land that goes into them. This gets to be a bit of a challenge, and I want to share just a smidge of that challenge. So for example, our oxen come into this vegetable production area, and they burn calories to do work. And we can track that to an extent. We actually have a gizmo we put behind them. We say, okay, here's how hard they're pulling when they're doing this job and how far they're traveling and so on. But at the end of the day, that didn't really make sense as the best measure of their energy, because that energy is coming from this area here where they're getting their hay and their pasture. So instead what we do is we measure this total boundary out here, and we say, okay, what's all the energy coming in, which is primarily human labor, to manage these guys over the course of the year. Okay, get them in and out of the barn during the winter, moving them around on pasture, cleaning out their stalls, and to produce their hay. So we actually track all the work that goes into haying with them. They produce their hay, they bring it in. And going in, these were our hypotheses for how this system would behave. So direct fossil fuel usage, what we actually burn in the fields. Okay, we're assuming, we're not really burning anything in the fields for either of these. We are in the tractor. What about the fossil fuel to produce what we need for these systems, what we call indirect fossil fuels, for the fertilizers, for the compost, for the remay, for the tools even? Now we thought the human power would be pretty close to zero. We're really pushing this system. The animal power has some, but we didn't think it would be much. And we kind of thought ahead of time the tractor would have a lot for its compost and other implements, imported nutrients. What we thought the yields would be, we thought the human with the close planting would be the highest. And labor demand and overall energy efficiency. We kind of thought the humans would win the day there with energy efficiency, and kind of based on some of that data you saw earlier. And now we have 2 years running of results, and we're learning a lot, including maybe learning a little bit of humility about our human-powered system, which is always a good thing. So for starters, thousands of dollars per acre. This is going off of UVM's farmers market tracking website. All of these systems are small enough where you should be able to direct market. So we're assuming direct marketing. Take that with a grain of salt, right? And we also assume some losses. We don't assume everything gets direct marketed. But you can see overall these systems are similar to other small vegetable systems in Vermont, which is grossing a fairly decent amount of money per acre. Yes? This is thousands of dollars. So this tells you that's an excellent question. The y-axis varies depending on which one of these you're looking at. So this is thousands of dollars per acre. Thank you. Good question.
Is that gross or net?
That's gross. Yep. And we'd like to get to where we figure out net. We haven't yet. So this is just gross income per acre. And you can see the tractor's done a little bit better yield-wise. Those cover crops hurt the humans. And things like I said, that remay, it's very useful for when you need it. And look where the oxen sit, way down low. Why? Because we charge them for the land it takes to feed them. We charge them for that year of fallow. Okay, that's a year of production taken out. So, be aware that those factors go in here. This doesn't mean they had really lousy crop yields. There's one factor there. Oxen are wide. And what's that mean? It means we have to keep our row crops farther apart, okay, than we might normally. Horses don't look it. Might surprise a lot of you, but they're pretty nimble with getting those feet in there. And oxen can do that, but they can also kind of do some of this. And so, we have a wider row spacing. This is an important one to interpret correctly. This is dollars per hour. That's gross dollars per hour of field labor. So there's no planning labor in here. There's no management labor in here. Okay. So based on my experience as a farmer, I kind of tend to think, all my other labor is about half of my production costs. When I walk out in the field, I'm just kind of looking around saying, okay, what makes sense to do next and assessing things. That's not in here at all. When I'm trying to direct and supervise people, that's not in here at all. This is just whenever anybody goes in the field and does some work, we track that. Okay? So don't think you take on one of these systems like, wow, $25 an hour, that's great. Rather, the most important thing is this is comparative. And so in particular, the humans sitting here about 25 and these more like 30 and 32 means you're taking a 15-20% hit in labor costs by going to this technology. I also tend to look at it and say, surely this means I can pay somebody $10 an hour and this is going to pay if per hour of their work in this system I'm grossing 25. Okay. The last one is pounds per hour. And so you can see a little bit of variability there. So this next one, this is a lot of info, but I want to give you the story that goes with this. So don't get too caught up in the numbers. But here's an important one. This is in megacalories. So that's thousands of our food calories. Okay. How much energy per acre are we putting in? And you can see the tractor's got about double what the humans are putting in. I'm going to show you the breakdown of what this energy is in a little bit. But, per acre, the tractor's got quite a bit more. Labor per acre in hours. Okay. And you can see per acre, again, the humans got a bit more. Now, you can also kind of assess from this, that's about 1,200 hours per acre of actual field work. So one person over the summer managing an acre, well managed, well organized, doable. Okay. Yield in pounds, tens of pounds per acre, just so it all fit on there. We've seen that number. This last one is energy yield per acre. And so in particular, this is the energy going in, that's the energy coming out, comparing those. And you can see there's not a big difference between pounds per acre, thousands of dollars per acre, calories per acre. They're all roughly the same order. That's coming, so don't try and calculate it in your head if that's of interest. This next one has pretty much the same stuff, but we've added in conventional vegetable production. So we got data on 4 representative crops: potatoes, cabbage, tomatoes, and a leafy green. I can't remember what the 4th one is now, I apologize. But basically, this represents a fairly similar mix of crops being produced and the energy. And you can see there's some pretty huge differences. For starters, this is the energy input per acre. Okay? So conventional vegetable production into a piece of land is able to pound a lot more energy in there. Okay? This is labor per acre. You're probably going to struggle to see it. There it is. That's the conventional vegetable production. Okay? And that number is coming down every year. Okay? Yield, they had the highest yield, okay, including yield in calories per acre. We didn't get on here. I want to show you is also the energy input per hour of labor. And it's amazing, conventional agriculture, per hour worked in the field, how much energy they're able to capture and put to work. And you can think of it two ways. You can say, golly, that's really awful. All that energy getting pushed through, in a short amount of time. Or you can think, wow, that's pretty amazing. That is an accomplishment to be able to capture that much power. Somebody had asked about the energy return. With vegetables, I try not to get too caught up on this. So you can see here's the tractor. We put it coming down because this is the break-even mark, right? One, you're putting as much energy in as you're getting out. And so the tractor is using more energy than it's putting out. For vegetables, that's not surprising. If we were to do conventional vegetable production, it would be down somewhere around in here. So it's quite a bit better than that. And to me, what I really tend to look at this and say is like, wow, we can produce vegetables and have net energy coming out. That feels pretty good. Now, if we were looking at wheat or corn, well, yeah, this had better be positive because that's where we're getting a lot of our calories out. So here's another way of looking at the results per category. So this kind of compares to our hypotheses. In each category, we said, well, whoever's using the most, we call it 100%. So, for example, under indirect fossil fuel usage, all the fossil fuels to support the system, the humans using 43% of the tractor, and the animals only using 31% of the tractor. Okay, so it gives you a pretty quick way of looking at it. Okay, with the fossil fuel return or with the energy efficiency, you can look at the overall thing, or you can say, neither of these guys are really using the fossil fuel usage. You do got the indirect fossil fuel usage. All right, probably what I think is the most important story coming out of all this, and this is a bit tricky to read, but we said, boy, there's a lot of energy going into the human system, more than we thought. What is it? What exactly are all these things going in? And so what helps you to know is that these colors, the order here is the order here. So you can find the big categories and say, oh, what is that? So here's two really big categories. And here they are, potting soil and cover crop seed. So we talked to Carl Hammer at Vermont Compost and said, what goes into Fort V? We do soil blocks, so we buy Fort V because it blocks really well. And what goes into that? And then we did our best to figure out the energy. This is not easy. This stuff it's hard to get good numbers. But this is a pretty good guess. And this is just the potting soil on our transplants, the energy it took to produce that and get it to our farm. Okay, roughly speaking, that it's over a quarter of the energy that goes into that system. The next one above is a little bit bigger. That's the energy it took to grow our cover crop seeds. Okay. Here's how I tend to think about this. We are in this little bubble trying really hard to be energy efficient. And every so often we have to reach outside the bubble because we need something from outside. Cover crop seed, vegetable seed, potting soil. And when we do that, it's like punching your fist through the wall of a spaceship out there, right? There goes your atmosphere. Quick, shut it up! Okay? The conventional system is so dramatically different that things like cover crop seeds are really energy expensive relative to what we're doing. Yes? That's the energy it takes, whoever produced our cover crop seed, to grow it. Nope. And so what's the natural conclusion for us if we want to make this system more efficient? Let's start saving some field pea seeds. Right? Let's start saving some rye and vetch seeds. A little bit of work, but obviously we could do it significantly more energy efficiently. Maybe we follow Scott Pruff's idea and produce our own potting soil. I don't see us going there yet. That sounds hard. Okay. Some other ones that are kind of notable for how small they are. So here's human energy. That's fairly significant. Storage energy. We have a CoolBot, a little homemade walk-in cooler. Still, to store things for half a day or a day so they come down to temp before we put them out for the CSA, that's energy. Okay. The things that didn't actually end up being very much, water usage, it's not a terribly big one. Equipment energy, it got a little bit bigger. Okay. Especially for the oxen, a lot of big heavy pieces of metal they're pulling and wearing out. So, and then finally you have these things that are unique to the tractor area. Here's the ProGrow. Here's the compost. And then there's the gasoline. Now, would I have guessed ahead of time that more energy was embodied in our compost that we're buying from Vermont Compost Company than in the gasoline we're burning in the field? No way. Go through a few other quick things. This shows you the top energy inputs by system. You can see cover crops pretty high on the human and oxen. Potting soil, fairly high. The only reason the tractor is significantly different, it's got the compost and gasoline. This is an interesting slide to say, what are you aiming to do? What's your goal here? So this is a labor to energy substitution. If you say, part of my goal is to save our system fossil fuels. So when I go out and work, I'm displacing other products that are more energy intensive. And so per hour of labor, okay, this is megacalories saved per hour, which is a kind of a cool stat to think about. So megacalories, 1,000 dietary calories. Okay. So for every hour of labor I work out there, I've saved the system enough energy to feed somebody for a day. Now, that's kind of cool. The oxen, about 50% more than that. The tractor, even a little bit more. But then we look at some other things here. Doing field work with horses, great thing for saving energy. Walking and riding a bike. Okay. Just kind of comparing some different ways. This slide gets at some of the complexities. How do I charge human labor? So this is the energy ratio. This is the amount of energy going in per calorie coming out. Okay, so the higher you go up, the more energy inefficient the system is. How do we measure our own labor as an energy? And if you're really into wanting to tackle this issue, this is an important one to help you think about where this lies. So we just use muscular energy. We say, how much are you burning to do a particular job? Instead, we could say, how much do you eat calorie-wise to be able to do work? Well, it goes up a little bit. Okay. Sequestered says, how much energy does it take to enable you to do work? Not just what you eat, but got to be clothed, got to have a home, and so on. Just for your labor. So we're going to assume a certain portion of your life is outside of work. Okay. This is a similar one that shows you the amount of diesel you save per hour of horse work. And it speaks well to some of the flexibility of these different systems. You'll notice that you tend to save the most on something like spreading or spraying, because these are relatively low energy jobs and you're driving the same big heavy piece of equipment, the tractor, through to do the same work. Okay. And so, for example, I have friends who, they bale hay with their oxen. They have a baler that pulls behind that has its own engine attached. And you might say, what's the point? If you're going to run a baler on diesel, why not just drive a tractor? Well, they only use a third of the energy that a tractor pulling a baler would, because the tractor pulling the baler, 2/3 of that energy is to pull that tractor through the field. Now, it's not to say that our oxen don't burn a lot of energy to pull themselves through the field as well. I think right now, we got about a little over 10 minutes left, and I would love to hear comments and questions and then have some discussion rather than see more numbers at this point. Yes?
So what does it all mean?
What does it all mean? Well, in the class I'm about to teach, we do talk about telling the story, and it comes down to what brought you here and what you're looking for. So if you are somebody whose one of your goals is, I want to have a job that helps the system save energy. Well, these things do save some, but there's other things that help the system save a lot more. If your job is, I want to try and push being fossil fuel free, and I want to know, can I make a living? Well, our data suggests there are ways to do that. I'm not going to say it's easy, but we are getting decent yields. We are getting decent returns on labor. It also suggests that there's not huge energy differences overall. I mean, the human and the animal are energy positive on their return. The tractor's not, but it's not that far down. And when you add in kind of the statistical wavering, we can't say for sure that if we did this for another 10 years, they're going to be different. However, we do know that into the tractor is going a lot of stuff that we don't have control over. And into the human and animals, we have control. So it really is, we all got to make our choices here. And if you want more control, there are systems out there that let you have that. But they're going to be harder. So, yes.
So you showed a little bit about the economics on gross returns. But what if, I assume you weren't paying for the labor? Was it,
right.
So if you had paid for that labor, do you think it would be a profitable system if you had just taken average wages for the amount of people and hours you had working?
I do. So the gross returns, were somewhere $25 to $33 per hour of field labor. And like I said, I kind of tend to, in my own experience, think, my field labor is probably about half of my overall expenses. So when I cover everything else, and in particular, remembering that, the tractor, the human and the oxen are relatively cheap systems. And I give a talk sometimes on just the human-powered production. And when I do a human-powered system, my goal is to have a net-to-gross ratio of somewhere around 90%, minimum 80%. And vegetable growers who are used to kind of conventional organic will almost always come up and say, you misspoke, right? You don't mean what I thought you meant. But I do, and part of this is because with human-powered, I can have my dream tools, especially if I'm just working for myself, I'm not having to supply a lot of labor, but just for myself, I can have my dream tools for $3,000. I can go out and get the very best human-powered tools, buying from Johnny's, who doesn't sell cheap, and and for the price of one good implement for the BCS, and for the price of nothing you're going to get for a tractor. You go to draft animals, it's a step up, and every time you go up that step of power, the step up in capital is significant. And so draft animals, if you are mechanically inclined, there's a lot of decent draft animal equipment out there, relatively cheap, you can restore. But if you're not, or you don't have the time, that stuff gets expensive pretty quickly. We pay about $1,200 to $1,500 for a mowing machine that probably needs a little bit of work. Really a nicely fine-tuned restored one is probably more like $2,500, $3,000. So I do, I don't want to, if any of you decide to go out and do human-powered production, you can't sue me if you don't make a living. There's a lot of factors in here, but the data suggests you can. Give us a couple of years to really crunch the net return numbers too, and then that's coming.
Was that all data from 1 year or 2?
That's 2 years so far.
But in the human system, you're putting no inputs in.
Right.
Like you weren't putting any compost.
Yep.
So in 4 years, your yields are going to be one half of what they are. And you're exporting thousands and thousands of pounds of nutrients.
Yep. So let's have that conversation. That's a good one. That's a good one. And
that was intentional. You wanted to see what.
Yep.
And you can adjust that up as needed over time.
Yep. So I would just make a quick comment on that. So the statement was, we're not putting much into the human system, and so over time, our yields could potentially go down. And we are monitoring the soil. If you see this talk in 4 years from now, it should include soil tracking to see what's happening. The two big things I would say is, one is there's no compost or fertilizer going in, but 1/5 is in cover, and the potting soil and mulch add up. And if you've read Elliot Coleman's book, he says, one of the things I like about soil blocks is you have more soil there, and it's good for the seedling, but also over time that becomes a significant amendment. Now you could say, okay, you're cheating a little bit because you don't want to rely on compost for the human system. Yes, okay, we are cheating, I admit. But there's that aspect, and then there's the aspect of maintaining the soil health, which I think is really not well understood to what degree we can push that. I think our yields will suffer a little bit. I think they were lower than the tractor in part because the tractor had things put in.
What's your plan for length on it, or is it just kind of open-ended at this point?
It's supposed to be 10 years. So, because a lot of these things will really settle into their grooves after about 5 or 6. So if you know any funders, though, we have funding for 1 more year, and then we're on the open market. I'm a free agent. No, I still get to teach. Somebody had a over there.
You're running a permanent bed system, but you're not running them in bed. The space of the lot is being totally not walked on. That's why don't you keep your mulch on there permanently and build that over time, and you will see your yields not down because there's a lot of activity happening.
Yeah. No, that's a good point about conceivably when we mulch the potatoes. So 1/10 of the beds, 2 out of 20 are in potatoes each year, and we mulch them pretty heavily. It's about close to a ton of leaves that goes onto one bed. And why don't we leave that on there? I guess we're just not that kind of farmer. It's not that's a potential system to develop. It may be a direction we go. But right now we're kind of too much in this mode of our organization is, yes, we prep the top inch or two, and then we either direct seed or transplant. And so that's a possible route we might go. Deep mulch systems overall, the biggest thing, they're a little bit like the double digging. The amount of labor to make them happen on a commercial scale is significant. Not impossible. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.